This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. I'm Sophie Ikenye. Our top stories. Former Congolese warlord Bosco Ntaganda has been found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity by the International Criminal Court. African countries launched the Continental Free Trade Deal amid calls for pending concerns to be addressed. It's a year since Ethiopia and Eritrea signed a landmark peace deal, but a UN report says human rights in Eritrea have not improved. A South African man vying to be one of the first black Africans to space has died in a road accident. Mandla Maseko had been on a mission to inspire young Africans.
And I'm Piers Edwards in Egypt, where the battle to reach the Africa Cup of Nations quarter-finals is entering its decisive stages. At present in Suez, late on, it's Mali 0, Ivory Coast 0.
Thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The International Criminal Court at The Hague has found the Congolese warlord Bosco Ntaganda guilty of 18 charges, including war crimes and crimes against humanity. He was also found guilty of rape, murder, sexual slavery and recruiting child soldiers. The offences date back to fighting more than 15 years ago in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo, when Mr. Ntaganda led an ethnically based militia. He had described himself as a soldier, not a criminal. The BBC's Anna Holligan reports.
Mr. Ntaganda, the chamber, having heard all of the evidence presented by the parties, finds you, as concerns count 1, guilty of murder as crime against humanity.
The court heard detail of gruesome atrocities. 49 mutilated bodies discovered in a banana field. A pregnant woman killed while trying to shield herself from rape. Children under the age of 15 conscripted to fight. Women and girls kept as sex slaves. Judges highlighted the horror brought by Bosco Ntaganda's rebel forces before finding the 41-year-old guilty of all 18 charges. In many respects, this was a landmark trial, the first in which a suspect has voluntarily surrendered to the International Court. He turned up at the US Embassy in Rwanda and asked to be sent to The Hague. And it's the first time anyone at the ICC has been found guilty of sexual crimes, slavery and rape as a weapon of war, a top priority for the prosecutor. And it's hoped his appearance here will act as a deterrent to others.
So the fact that an arrest warrant is not immediately implemented does not mean that justice is stopped. I think it's a very important judgment for the accused to know what is the outcome after a longer trial. It's also important for the victims and the affected communities that have been waiting for the outcome of this trial for quite a long time.
More than 2,000 witnesses took part in this trial. Human rights groups said the judgment provided an important measure of justice. Bosco Ntaganda now has 30 days to launch an appeal. If the guilty verdict is upheld, next will be the question of how long he should spend behind bars and how much compensation, if any, should be awarded to the survivors, many of whom risked their lives to take part in this trial, to ensure that it has some kind of tangible, positive impact on their lives. Anna Holligan, BBC News.
Well, African leaders have launched a continental free trade zone, which, if successful, would unite more than 1 billion people in an economic bloc worth more than $3 trillion. Now, the CAFCFTA was formally unveiled at a summit of the African Union in Niger. The hope is that the plan will unlock the continent's economic potential. Maggie Mutesi has more from Niamey.
The launch of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is a significant step towards integration on the continent. The African Union says the deal will become the largest free trade area since the formation of the World Trade Organization. The aim is to significantly increase trade between African countries, which is apparently hampered by non-tariff barriers and restrictions. Nigeria had pulled out last minute over concerns that it would make the country a dumping ground for goods. But much to the relief of the African Union, President Muhammadu Buhari signed up the continent's largest economy. Its chief negotiator at the AU explains the delay behind the signing of the agreement.
The level of knowledge was low. And so what we had to do, we, Nigeria being the case, in shepherding the negotiations to conclusion, was to build capacity, to raise the level of knowledge of all the chief trade negotiators. Moving into that command speed gear, I think, was the biggest challenge of all.
There's still a lot of work to do for trade to become easier on the continent, and the African Union has started the process of eliminating the non-tariff barriers between the 27 African countries that have ratified the agreement. Some of Africa's top business people and industry leaders, however, say that until some of the pending concerns are addressed, the agreement might as well be a long-time dream.
Now, to make it effective, we need to have an infrastructure. It costs more to trade among ourselves.
We need to bring the right training, but also we need to create funding for the emerging designers. We cannot do good if there is no funding. We cannot do good if there is no skill trainings, and we cannot do good if we don't invest in youth and women.
Although the elimination process of non-tariff barriers between ratified countries has begun, the AU has set July the 1st, 2020 as the date when open trade and free movement of people will begin across the continent.
What it means on that day is that all the goods and services that will be able to move duty-free across the market.
The United Nations Economic Commission for Africa estimates that the agreement has the potential to boost intra-Africa trade by 53%. Currently, intra-Africa trade stands at about 16% as a result of import duties and non-tariff barriers. Maggie Motesi, BBC News, Niamey.
Now, Sudan's ruling military and opposition are finalizing the draft of a power-sharing agreement reached by the two parties on Friday. They agreed on a jointly run sovereign council that will rule for a little over 3 years while elections are organized. So I asked the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Tibor Nagy, will the deal hold? And what's to stop Sudan from transitioning into military regime led by army generals in suits?
That happens, but here's, again, you know, we have to trust the people. And the United States policy on this is whatever comes out of this has to be acceptable to the people. Whether it's a civilian putting on a doctor's coat or... I don't think the international community can get involved in making the sausage. We have to leave that up to the Sudanese. We just have to be very supportive together.
What needs to be done, or what needs to happen next in Sudan for the U.S., for instance, to remove them from the terror list, sponsors of terror?
Everybody asks me that question. Here's the deal. Right now there's no quid pro quo. You know that if the Sudanese do X, then the U.S. is going to do Y. We are going to wait, evaluate, see what kind of a transitional government emerges, to get to your earlier question, and then we will decide if we can re-engage or not. Obviously, the long-term goal, everybody in the United States wants to have perfectly normal relations with Sudan.
Then National Security Advisor John Bolton, when he was laying out the U.S. strategy for Africa, he was very clear that the U.S. wants to counter Chinese influence. Can you really do that on the continent?
Well, what I want to do on the continent is give the Africans themselves another alternative. You know, for too long, when investors have knocked on the door and the Africans opened the door, the only person standing there was the Chinese. My job is to make sure that next time there's a knock on the door, there's an American standing there as well, investor, because we get back to the same fundamental issue in Africa. That's employment for young people.
But we're looking at a situation where China right now is meeting the continent's needs very quickly. Infrastructure, and now soon the continent will have the 5G network, which is very key for the employment issue you're talking about.
Well, I'm not sure about the 5G. I don't know how many people that's going to employ. And as far as meeting the infrastructure needs, Just when I was in Addis Ababa a couple of weeks ago, it turned out that the ring road, which was constructed by China a few years ago, part of it just collapsed. So, you know, again, I want to get back to the point of giving the advantage to the Africans to be able to have more choices than one company or one country providing the, you know, the contracts and the labor.
So speaking of choices, you recently made a statement saying African countries running up debt that they are unable to pay should not expect to be bailed out by Western-sponsored debt relief.
Absolutely.
Is that a threat to the continent?
It's not a threat. It's just a statement.
What is it then?
Well, it's not a threat. It's a simple matter of fact. We went through this in the 80s and the 90s, right? The highly indebted poor countries' debt that had incredible amounts of debt, and the Western donors basically got together and said, you will never be able to repay that, so we wipe it off the books, okay? That's one thing. Now, African countries that are running up billions and billions of dollars in debt again, when it comes time to pay that debt, they will have to figure out how to pay it back. You know, people can run up all the debt they want to, but when it comes time to repay it, then it's certainly not going to come out of the United States of America's pocket.
Now, 1 year has passed since Ethiopia and Eritrea signed a historic peace deal that reopened the border between the two countries. Diplomatic and trade relations were restored and divided families were finally reunited. But a new UN report on Eritrea says that the human rights situation in the country has not improved despite the peace agreement. Well, the BBC's Emmanuel Igunza has more.
It's been a dramatic 12 months in relations between Eritrea and Ethiopia, once bitter enemies who fought a bloody border war. A new peace deal signed last July has led to the reopening of borders and allowed trade between these two countries to flourish again. The changes marked a remarkable turnaround for the once isolated country and reignited hopes that those who had fled Eritrea could finally go back home. But for some Eritreans living in exile, that hope has been dashed a year on. This man, who didn't want his identity revealed, says he fled Eritrea concerned about indiscriminate arrests and the indefinite national service conscription, which has made many young people flee the country.
I can only go back home if the government is totally changed. With the current situation, people living out of Eritrea cannot go back willingly. It's easy to say the current government is just a collection of friends, and if the country isn't ruled by the constitution, people can't go back.
And those same criticisms came up last week at the Human Rights Council in Geneva. A UN report detailed what it said were continuation of human rights abuses in the country, including the recent government shutdown of several Catholic Church institutions.
There has been no tangible improvement in the situation of human rights in the country. The dividends of peace are not yet benefiting ordinary Eritreans, nor are there any signs to suggest they will. As a result, hundreds continue to flee the country every month.
But the report was immediately dismissed by the Eritrean government.
Eritrea's door remains open for all those who want to genuinely engage in constructive dialogue and cooperation in the promotion and protection of human rights.
When I come here after 3 years, I got my...
But there are still many who aren't convinced about the guarantees of their safety and human rights record inside Eritrea.
When I have a guarantee to live in my country, yes. But if the doctor is still in my country, what can I do? When I go back to my country, simply my place is prison.
Emmanuel Igunza, BBC News, Addis Ababa.
This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Still to come in sport, it's the last day of the round of 16 at the Nations Cup. We bring you the latest from Mali versus Ivory Coast and a look ahead to Ghana against Tunisia. I'm Sophie Ikenye and you're watching Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The top stories on this program. Former Congolese General Bosco Ntaganda has been found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity by the International Criminal Court in The Hague. African countries launch a free trade deal for the continent. If successful, it will unite more than 1 billion people in an economic bloc. You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. It's time now for some sport. Let's join Piers Edwards in Cairo. And Piers, last day of the round of 16, and what a round it's been.
Indeed, Sophie, it's been an incredible round. Drama from the very first match and shocks from the very first match when Benin knocked out Morocco, heavily tipped by many to win the tournament, including myself, I must be honest. Then Egypt, the host, knocked out by South Africa, who had been appalling in the group stages, really rose to the occasion. That obviously caused another earthquake here, as it were. And then last night, Madagascar. Their fairy tale run continues as they made it to the last 8, and we'll reflect on that in a moment. But there is one game going on at the moment. Mali bidding to win a first title, taking on the two-time champions Ivory Coast in Suez, and the game is, well, it's in stoppage time now. 1-0 Ivory Coast lead. Mali dominated largely the first half, and then Ivorians came back in the second half. Wilfried Zaha scoring the all-important goal since we've been on air after 75 minutes. A long ball over the top that he fired home from a tight angle, and the winner of that game will meet Algeria in the next round. So the best of luck to them, because Algeria are looking pretty strong. Now, later tonight, the final match to get to the quarterfinals takes place. Ghana against Tunisia. Ghana have taken a little while to warm up. They drew their opening 2 before winning their final group game against Guinea-Bissau. Tunisia, meanwhile, have yet to win a game at the tournament so far. But with all these shocks, no one is underestimating anybody here.
If you are one of the favourites, it doesn't mean, all is going to be okay for you. You have to go out there every 90 minutes, give your best, and progress in this tournament. And we've all seen, the surprises in this tournament. So we don't need to underrate any team. We go out there with everything we have and, keep on progressing till the finals.
Inevitably, we have modified our approach to this match. Since we know that at the end of this match, there will be a team that will continue in the competition and not the other. That is the state of mind we are in while preparing for this meeting.
And the winner of that match, which kicks off in just over an hour, will meet Madagascar in the next round. Let's look at the way the quarterfinals are shaping up now. The first match is Senegal against Benin. That's on Wednesday. Then it's South Africa against Nigeria. It takes us back to the 2000 Nations Cup semi-final. Algeria, well, at the moment, it looks like they're going to be playing Ivory Coast. And then we wait to find out who play Madagascar, because last night in Alexandria, the team known as the Baraya, which is named after a local cattle, stunned DR Congo on penalties. It continues their incredible run to the finals of this competition. They played in the preliminary phase of qualifying because they were so lowly ranked. Now they've got as far as they have, of course, in this tournament. No wonder they've been celebrating.
We are very, very, very happy. The first time we will take part for this soccer, but now we win.
I'm so happy for Baraya. I'm from Madagascar. Thank you.
Well, these are absolutely incredible scenes outside the Alexandria Stadium. If you look behind me, these are the Baraya fans, the Madagascar supporters, celebrating their shock passage to the quarterfinals of the Africa Cup of Nations. They started in the qualifying round over 2 years ago because they were amongst the 6 worst teams in the tournament. Today, they're in the last 8 with the potential to go further.
Nobody thought that they would be able to qualify just for the final phase. But now we qualified for the second tour, and now we qualify for the quarterfinals, and that's a great thing for Madagascar football.
I think in Madagascar today, there's a big event to celebrate this victory.
There certainly were. Fans took to the street in number to party like never before. The lucky ones, though, were in the stadium, just under 500 of them, after the country's president organised a chartered plane to Egypt.
We left Madagascar yesterday night, something like midnight. We flew for 7 hours. We drove back. We drove to Alexandria for 4 hours. We were tired, but then so much excited to follow the match.
A good father is someone who knows how to support his children, and a good president, whose national team reaches the knockout stages, has to act.
Madagascar have long been African football make-weights. Now they're not only beating heavyweights, but amongst them. Fans say hard work, humility and teamwork are the key to their success. What does their coach say?
Une bande de frères et de copains. Ouais, tout à fait.
We're a band of brothers. We've been together for 5 or 6 weeks and there hasn't been one problem between the players and the staff.
Madagascar find out on Monday night whether they will face Ghana or Tunisia in Thursday's quarter-final. Of course, now the dream is to go all the way, from playing in the very first qualifier of the 2019 Nations Cup campaign to the final itself.
It's true that Madagascar has always been last in terms of sport, especially football. But now we can see that Madagascar is shining. With hard work, dedication, perseverance, nothing is impossible. And hopefully we'll win the AFCON.
But if they did win this Nations Cup, it would be hard to think of many more unlikely footballing fairy tales. Well, will it continue in the quarterfinals? It would be extraordinary if it did. Let's bring you some coaching news because Tanzania parted ways with Emmanuel Amunike today. That was by mutual consent. We hear, obviously, Tanzania here and played and exited in the group stages. Uganda coach Sebastian Desabwa, well, he didn't leave Uganda so long ago and he's not wasted any time in finding a new job either. He's signed a contract with Pyramids FC here in Egypt, one of the continent's wealthiest clubs. And in case you missed it over the weekend, Egypt coach Javier Aguirre was sacked and the Egypt FA president Hani Abu Rida resigned. He stayed in charge of the local organising committee for this tournament, however, given he is president there, saying it is his responsibility to stay on in that role. And news just in, Ivory Coast are through to the quarterfinals of the Nations Cup. So we now know 7 of the 8 teams already there. They will play Algeria in the next round. That should be some game. Peter, there's going to be some quarterfinals if the round of 16 or anything to come by. Don't forget, sorry, Pierre, Sophie, I should say, it's Tunisia and Ghana coming up. If I could see you, I might know that it's you and not Peter.
I understand, Piers, but thank you very much indeed for that update. Thank you, Piers. Now, a South African man who was due to fly into space has died in a motorbike accident. Mandla Maseko beat 1 million entrants to win one of 23 places at a space academy in the United States. His family says he was killed on Saturday before he had the chance to fulfill his dream. Pumza Fekhlani reports from Johannesburg.
Mandla Maseko had big dreams. He would have been the first black African in space, but was killed before making this dream a reality. He died in a motorbike accident on Saturday. A pilot, DJ and avid biker, he described himself as a typical boy from the township, but many believed he was much more. In tributes on local social media, he's been described as extraordinary, a dreamer and an inspiration.
This is me.
At his home in Soshanguve Township, the 30-year-old said he wanted the flight to inspire all Africans, to show them that anything was possible.
We actually saw a rocket launch.
He trained for a week at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, preparing for the hour-long suborbital flight, originally scheduled for 2015. In the last few years, Maseko has been working with various charities as well as public speaking. He wanted to inspire school children to study science and technology. The space mission had not happened at the time of his passing, but it is believed to still be in the works.
This is me.
In earlier interviews, he said he wanted the flight to be a victory for all Africans. He planned to take the South African flag with him, along with a map of Africa. Pumza Fihlani, BBC News, Johannesburg.
But don't forget, you can get in touch with me and some of the team on Twitter. I'm at Sikenye. But let's focus on Africa for now. Thanks for your company.